And she's heading up a whole new section within our university that's aimed at coordinating and optimizing and growing our activities related to making sure that our operations here are sustainable in the way that we do things, but also making sure that sustainability is embedded within our education programs and to support sustainability-oriented research wherever possible. So Uisce obviously fits really well and really neatly within that. And as part of that, researchers in the university are currently writing a proposal that's to be submitted very shortly, within a few weeks, to set up a national all-Ireland research centre in climate, generally in climate, but with a focus also on biodiversity, and certainly the water and energy nexus targeted by Uisce will be a central part of that as well. That's an all-Ireland research centre. As I said, it'll be funded by SFI from Ireland and from UKRI. There's a clear north-south dimension to it. Universities in the north and other partners in the north will join partners from the south in that. But there's also an east-west dimension as well. And who knows, maybe there'll be opportunity to continue on the type of east-west Britain-Ireland partnership that's been so strong here within Uisce. And as also within our university, so we're sitting here in this School of Business, as you can see, a wonderful new building, a new facility, but that doesn't appear out of the ground by accident. It's been part of a very large commitment by the university and by the staff of the School of Business to a multi-annual plan that obtained the money to put this building in place, to create the new courses and to bring in the new students, and really importantly to employ new academic staff who can become engaged in research and in teaching in important current areas. So a good way to revitalize the university is to bring in young people. And a similar initiative is taking place, what we call E3, and many of you will have seen the building site not very far from here, trying to orientate myself. I think it must be in that direction, I'm not sure. And that's E3 will be, it's a partnership between the School of Engineering, School of Natural Sciences and School of Computer Science. The original 3 E's were engineering, energy and environment. They've changed their meaning slightly since then, but that was the original concept, to bring those 3 together, and that's really lines up pretty centrally with what Uisce has been all about. So our university is really committed to work in this area, and Uisce is really viewed as a flagship or a leading light project in that sense. It has been supported, of course, by the Intergreg programme, multiple awards exceeding €5 million, funding a partnership between Trinity and Bangor University and other participants as well for over 10 years now. So a really kind of very strong, very solid research project, and it has produced some fantastic research outputs and deliverables. I think Angus told me over 80 papers have been written, more than 30 of those in being journal articles. And really importantly, on top of that, and I was just talking to Paul beforehand, the number of people who have obtained training in this really important area during the course of the last 10 years. So I think it's something like 11 PhD students and nearly 20 postdoctoral researchers have had opportunities to work in this field thanks to the partnership. And that training, that development, that preparation of people to work in the field, that is the most long-lasting legacy of any project like this. So we're really, really proud of that. And the other notable feature then of Uisce, which sets it apart as being an early success in an area that's becoming more and more important for universities, is in the whole area of transdisciplinary research. And I know Paul is going to maybe speak a bit about that later. At least that's what's on the agenda. So in this case, we can see that we have participants from academia, from universities, but also from industry, from government and from broader society, all coming together, not just to experience the research and not just to observe the results of the research, but actually to participate side by side intimately within it. So the examples of the applications of the work in the test sites, like at the Black Scares Group water supply scheme, at ABP, at Penryn Castle, is it, in Wales? So, you know, fantastic examples of how the research carried out in the universities can find its way into different sectors in society, different important economic sectors, always with the goal of having those environmental and climate and energy benefits. So that's it, all I have to say. Just again to repeat, welcome you here, and to note that Angus reminded me recently that I apparently introduced both Paul and him more than 10 years ago. I'd forgotten that. I can't even remember the occasion where it happened, but he tells me that was the case. And they've gone on to work so closely together over the last 10 years. I'm really pleased to be able to, if that was the case, and to congratulate both them and, of course, their partners from Bangor University on a really successful Uisce project. So thank you.
So, right. We use this one. So thanks very much. Oh, I don't need to speak so loud. So thanks very much, Brian, for that kind introduction, and welcome to everybody. We were having some Zoom issues, so apologies to the people online who might have missed the singing at the start, but they'll be singing at the end, so you won't miss out so much. We have a Welsh Government perspective from Lee Waters, who kindly recorded a message for us. So I'm just going to play that for you. So Lee Waters is the Deputy Minister for Climate Change in Wales, fairly senior in the Welsh Government for those that are unfamiliar with that over here in Ireland. And I'm going to give his perspective and then we'll carry on. So, right at the beginning.
Hello pawb a diolch am y cyfle I siarad I chi heddiw. I'm glad to be able to speak to you today as we celebrate the achievements and successes of the Uisce project. Today you will hear in more detail what the project has achieved to improve the long-term sustainability of water supply, treatment and end use in Ireland and Wales. This includes the development of policy and best practice guidelines to encourage the use of integrated low carbon and smart energy solutions for the water sector. For me, I was particularly struck by the outcomes of the 4 pilot plants for energy saving technology in Ireland and Wales, which demonstrated the energy savings which could be made in both micro hydropower and the recycling of waste heat in wastewater. In particular, how wastewater heat recovery in commercial kitchens has the potential to reduce energy used across the UK hospitality sector. Both Wales and Ireland have set challenging net zero targets. And the challenge of climate change requires everyone to act, in fact to do more in the next decade than we managed over the course of the whole of the last 3 decades. With Uisce estimating that 500,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide could be saved every year. This shows how the water sector can play a real part in our collective transition to a low carbon economy. Of course, this would also benefit our hospitality industry too, still recovering from the impact of the pandemic and now facing the challenge of operating with higher energy prices. So by reducing their energy consumption, they could also lower their costs. Engagement is key to ensuring everyone feels a shared responsibility for how we all interact with the environment. And Uisce has successfully engaged with industry, wider society and policymakers through a number of channels to promote the potential for energy and CO2 savings in water systems, including building the Island Wales Water Energy Network to build knowledge as well as to promote an action learning network to stimulate new innovative supply relationships in the region. This smart specialisation approach is something both the Welsh and Irish governments encourage. It not only supports our ambitions on low carbon transition, but also delivers inclusive growth to communities. The project has engaged and collaborated with Irish householders to improve our understanding of water-related energy home use in homes, particularly through their citizen survey. These findings will now be used to inform best practice guidelines for climate action through household waste use efficiency. Tackling the climate emergency is at the heart of the Welsh Government's priorities. However, we have a fundamental belief that we can approach these challenges better through collaboration rather than unilateral action. Uisce is one of 23 projects funded by the Wales Island Cooperation Programme, a programme which has a long-standing record of success, where organisations actively cooperate across boundaries to share the challenges that we must face. By tackling these joint interests and priorities, projects such as Uisce are driving innovative action on climate change, whilst also producing wider benefits to our communities and businesses on both sides of the Irish Sea. Our shared ambition is to continue a cross-border strategic approach with our Irish counterparts as part of the Irish Sea Framework, a commitment to explore, to collaborate and to work in partnership. Finally, I would just like to congratulate Trinity College Dublin and Bangor University, who lead on Uisce, for their work and achievements. By providing a better understanding of how climate change will directly and indirectly impact on the demand for water needs, we can better address and mitigate against future uncertainties. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Gobeithio byddwch yn mwynhau gweddill y ddiwrnod. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Hello pawb, a diolch.
Thank you, Lee. So thank you very much for that. You're not here to hear us round of applause, but we would give one otherwise. It's very very well delivered few words, I thought. So we'll carry on to them. We've had lots of introductions, and now we better get into the meat of. Oh, I'm sorry. We've had lots of introductions and technical glitches. Now I get into the meat of everything. So for the next hour or so, we're going to speak about the different disciplinary perspectives of the work that we carried out. So what was the Uisce project about from the perspective of engineering, I'll speak about, followed by Professor from an environmental science and economics perspective. And then Paul will talk a little bit about the collaboration aspect. So first, before I get into the engineering side of things, stay in one spot. Before I get into the engineering side of things, the microphone is a little bit too loud. No? Okay, so to give an overall introduction to the project was about the water, energy, food nexus in a kind of a broad sense. So if you had a cup of coffee outside this morning, a certain amount of water and energy went into the producing that. And you could similarly, if you had your croissant, similarly a certain amount of water and energy went into producing that. And what we were focused on in Uisce is trying to make the water, energy, food nexus more sustainable, trying to improve that process, use less water, use less energy for the production of those three sort of finite resources. Right? So we need water and energy to produce food, and we need, each requires the other for various reasons. And so from the engineering perspective, we try to develop some technologies to try and improve the sustainability of that process. We also went into benchmarking. Professor will speak in a minute, environmental impact assessment, economic impact assessment. And then Paul will mention that we spoke about all of this to various, over 250 stakeholders in the Ireland-Wales region. And we developed these technologies from the perspective of water users, and we're all water users, and then also from water suppliers. We try to address things for the supplier of water and also the user, for the user particularly focusing on hot water use, which we all do. So I'm going to give you an example of both of those today. The project formerly had a number of work packages, work elements to it. These specifically are in the light blue circles here, the technology platform. So we developed something on hydropower, on the recovery of heat, and the control of water networks. We did a number of things that Professor will speak more about, as I mentioned already, on life cycle assessment, environmental impact, benchmarking, climate change assessment, and so on. And then we had a smart specialization cluster, which Lee Waters mentioned, and Paul will speak more about, to try and spread the message and also listen to the various industry stakeholders on the solutions that they needed, as opposed to the ones we wanted to give them. Okay, so on to my two examples. So I'm going to start with the water users example, right? So we all use hot water to a certain extent. You had a shower this morning. It was typically at 40 degrees, plus or minus 2, maybe, depending on how hot or cold you like it. And what goes down the drain is at 30 degrees. And so an area which we worked a lot on is drain water heat recovery, trying to recycle the waste heat in wastewater. And so wastewater contains a lot of waste heat. So if you imagine on a cold day like today in Dublin, the water that came into your house was probably around 5 degrees, and you heated it up to 60 or 70 degrees, used it at 40, and down the drain it goes at 30. So all of that hot water going down the drain, well, it just releases into the atmosphere. And imagine it's quite a waste of energy. So we tried to develop a technology around recapturing some of that, as well as a few other challenges. So you can see in 2016, if we go, remember this is a long project, we're going back to 2016, we tried to address a number of unknowns. First of all, we know there's waste heat in the wastewater system, but we don't know how much there is, because we measure a lot of things in the sewers about the quality of the water and how much there is, but the heat is not really an interesting, or hadn't been up to that point, an interesting variable. So we tried to map how much heat was available and how that changed in space and time, and then come up with some sort of technical solutions. And the key part to the project in Uisce is we also then tried to put things in the field to test them out and show how well they would work or wouldn't work. And we had a number of pilot sites, the various speakers mentioned. So the idea of wastewater heat recovery is an old idea, around for a long time, particularly for showers. So you can buy a commercially available heat exchanger that replaces the drain pipe at the bottom of a shower. And it essentially recycles the waste heat. Normal drain pipe is some kind of a plastic, which is an insulator. And we replace it with a conductor. And essentially, as the little animation is showing, that preheats the water that goes into the shower before it gets there. And so it's warmer than it would have been, and you don't have to heat it as much. There's a certain amount of saving. And that works really quite well, and has been around in places like the US and Canada for a long time, particularly because they often have this vertical space under their showers. Basements and things are common. There's another reason it worked quite well is because the wastewater goes out at the same time as the cold water comes in, and they pass each other. And so from an engineering point of view, it's easy to make the heat exchanger. But showers contain some waste heat, but there's a lot of other things that contain much more. So for example, a commercial kitchen or a food processing plant. So we required solutions for those kinds of examples where the energy density is much higher. So we weren't trying to solve this already solved problem. We were trying to sort of move further up the chain. So we were trying to address, well, how much waste heat is there in the sewer network? And that involved going around to various businesses and measuring it. So we started off in the 2016 in the domestic sector and said, well, if we were to try and capture all of the waste heat in the full house, capture your dishwasher and your washing machine and your kitchen sink, as well as the shower, and have just one solution for that, what heat would be there? So that involved measuring waste heat at a number of residences around Ireland and Wales, with the help of some very good, very bright, very motivated students. This is Jan Spreet, who did his PhD here. I think he graduated in 2020 or so. Wasn't afraid to get in up close with the material of his thesis. You can see him there installing some heat sensors. But in the domestic sector, back at the energy prices then, the payback for heat recovery didn't seem particularly strong. It was in excess of 10 years, more or less. If we were to redo that now, probably it would be much more attractive. But at the time, the domestic sector didn't seem to be the place where we would focus. So we moved more into places like hotels and cafes and restaurants, and then also industrial users of hot water, like pharmaceuticals, food production. ABP was mentioned, for example. We also did measurements at a variety of companies producing, soft drinks and things like that. And we were able to come up with estimates for the hospitality sector for the whole of the UK using our measurements and also some published data of 1.4 terawatt hours per year of waste heat from commercial kitchens, most of which came from the healthcare sector, actually, the restaurants and so on, and hospitals and and so on, but also hotels and restaurants were a big part of that. We also measured waste heat in actual wastewater treatment plants. So you imagine by the time the wastewater gets all the way to the treatment plant that it won't have any of the heat in it left. But actually it still has a little bit of temperature difference. And it turns out that most of the heat in energy is in the wastewater treatment plant. And so if you were recovering waste heat from your shower, it might be a few kilowatts of waste heat. But if you could do it at your wastewater treatment plant, it's in the megawatts to gigawatts of power. More heat than is generally required in locations like that, which are often sort of isolated from the demand for heat. So we managed to then develop a picture of what the network, and we still have some work to do on this, on what the framework for waste heat and sewers looked like. And so if you imagine you start off at the component level and your heat exchanger is the little box up there with the slash through it. As we move further and further along the sewer network, the energy is essentially the temperature difference times the amount of flow. And when you have those two together, as you move further away, the heat is lost to the soil and lost to the air. But by the time it gets to the sewer treatment works, it still has 2 or 3 degrees of a difference between, you know, ambient air temperature and the surrounding environment. So for that reason, you can see the kind of scale up at the top in that we're at kilowatts for the shower component scale and gigawatts further down. There are a variety of challenges around that. So the further along the sewer system we get, the more, let's say, the more nasty the wastewater becomes and the harder it is to recover heat from an operational point of view. So recovering it from a shower is wastewater, but it's not that dirty what comes off as, you know, as we were rolling around in something very nasty, it's just sort of soapy water. So that is easy to recover heat from. And as we'll see, we went into the wastewater treatment works of a meat processing plant, and the wastewater was very severe, and that was quite challenging to try and recover heat from. So as I was mentioning, we tried to pilot this at a number of places. If you're after our talks out in the lobby, there are posters on each of the demo sites with a little QR code, and you can scan, and there are 3D tours, which we put together because of COVID at the time. And so you can see the detail of all of these. But at Penryn Castle, there was a commercial kitchen associated with a cafe, reasonably small one. It was put in operation or ready to be put in operation just before COVID, but we had a sort of a pause, and then it ran for the 2022 tourist season. And I guess, you know, we'll run for the 2023 tourist season when that starts. And it saves essentially waste heat from the making of lunch and teas and coffees at Penryn Castle, which is also a beautiful place to visit if you happen to be passing through North Wales. So I don't know if my laser, how do I do my laser? Laser works on this. It does, yeah. So we just replaced this. Used to be a vertical drain with a heat exchanger, and there's some other engineering around integrating that saved heat into the heating system of the castle, but it produced a payback between 1 and 7 years, actually 7 years for that castle because they use biomass as their fuel source, but not so many kitchens will have a biomass boiler, and so if it was electrical energy, then it would be a 1 year payback. So not a very big investment and a decent return. Underneath that is ABP Foods, which produces beef. This is a much larger scale wastewater treatment plant and much larger volumes of water. Madhu over in the corner here was working on that, tirelessly trying to unblock various parts of the test rig, containing parts of animals and grass and so on. So it was difficult to operate, but if you look at the difference between the amount of energy recovered, so this was 1,500 kilowatts hours in the year versus 48 to 160 kilowatt hours per day, at the treatment works. So we still have some work to do on this. We developed quite a small pilot plant for ABP as a preliminary test, and we have some further funding to develop that further beyond the Uisce project. Whereas in the castle where the wastewater was easier to handle, we have more or less a fully operating system. So after all of that research, so the kind of key takeaways are is there's a significant amount of waste heat in the sewer network. And the key sectors that we identified are things like commercial kitchens, cafes and restaurants, industrial users of hot water, particularly the food sector, and then sewers, municipal wastewater treatment plants. The key factors in extracting the heat, which I didn't mention very much, are the ambient temperature and the cold water temperature. So they affect the energy gradient. So if it's very cold and the wastewater is very hot, like today, for example, we can recover a lot out of it. But if it was a very hot summer's day and the wastewater is about the same temperature, it's difficult to get, or the energy gradient is less. So those kinds of things we are working on. And similarly, another thing we are working on is the impact of heat recovery on wastewater treatment itself. So some processes are temperature sensitive, and it's not simply a case that we can extract the heat without interfering in the process. So we have to be very careful about that, which is again, work in progress. We have a number of other projects starting more or less around this month and previous months to try and build on these things further. We started, not knowing how much waste heat was in the sewer system. You'll see in comparison to my water user hydropower example, we were a little bit further down the technology development road. So we still have some work to do here. And for example, we're starting this Reheats project funded by Enterprise Ireland to sort of develop 3D printed thermally conductive plastic heat exchangers, which we can retrofit into some of those difficult environments we experienced. So on to the second example then, which was for the water supplier, recovering some hydraulic energy from the water supply system. So this is again addressing the water energy nexus. In the process of water supply, it consumes a lot of energy through pumping and treating water that we drink. It's the fourth most energy intensive sector in the UK and Ireland. There are a variety of ways that you could try and improve that. And we were looking at one area which we had some expertise in, which is very small hydropower units. So we were trying to address the challenge of developing hydropower units for existing water infrastructure within the power ranges that are mentioned there, 20 to 50 kilowatts. So hydropower is a very old technology, around for a long time, but in small scales, at the time, conventional hydropower was not viable for that setting. So you couldn't miniaturize massive turbines to being in the megawatt, from the megawatt to kilowatt scale, but their cost is just too expensive. So for that reason, we focused on something called a pump-as turbine. I'll mention what that is in a minute, as a low-cost solution to try and work that out. And we also tried to come up with the challenge of that pump-as turbines weren't well regarded by the water sector at the time. There was a number of people who had tried this before and had some failures, which we had to sort of recover from. So the idea of putting hydropower in water treatment networks has been around for a long time. There's one in Ireland, for example, two in Ireland, prior to the pilot plants we built ourselves, which are on the large scale in the transmission network. So if you look at the diagram there, the transmission network would be the large pipes that take water from the source to the treatment plants in large volumes, and we can, in certain places, recover energy from that. So within water networks, we occasionally have too much pressure or too much head. We have to get this out of the system to avoid pipe bursts and leaks. And that is normally done through valves or through sort of open tanks. And it's a waste of the energy that went into it in the first place. The idea of hydropower in water networks is we put the turbine in place and it also reduces that pressure, but it generates electricity at the same time. So we wanted to come along and put in turbines at a variety of places within the water distribution network, where the amount of power is small, between 5 and 10 kilowatts typically. And we couldn't get a commercially available conventional hydropower device miniaturized in an economically viable setting for that scale. So this built on some work we did in the previous Interreg Ireland Wales program called Hydro BPT, which was a kind of a desk-based study exploring this idea of hydropower in water networks more exclusively. And we were starting a little bit further down the road of development. So we already knew how much energy was there and what the problem to be addressed technically was. So we were starting at TRL, technology readiness level 3 or 4, if you're unfamiliar with that. It's a scale of how far you are to a commercial project, ending at 9, I guess. So we used pump as turbines, and so a pump as turbine is essentially a pump which is reversed to produce energy instead of consume it. So it's a commercially available pump that you would buy from a supplier, and we just hook it up backwards. Now, a pump and a turbine are hydraulically, they are opposite, but why would you use a pump to be a turbine? It has a number of disadvantages, right? Some reason not using it's not going to be designed for that purpose. It's going to be less efficient, produce less power. So it would make more sense to use a conventional device, but those are much more expensive at this scale. So the key advantage of this is the cost. It was 5 to 15 times less expensive than a conventional machine, which makes a huge difference to economic viability. Also, these are quite small, and in the water networks, we don't often have the big space available that conventional hydropower might require. They're very short delivery times. There's a number of advantages. The key unknown was this: when we reverse the turbine or the pump into a turbine, we don't know how it behaves. We know it's possible for it to produce energy, but its characteristic curve was unknown. So Daniele Novara, sitting up the back there, was key, did his PhD on this and worked as a postdoc to come up with, well, how do we predict the reverse operation of these? So we worked, and Daniele worked tirelessly on developing a software for this, which was essentially to take the inputs of what the available flow and head was at different places and produce a prediction of the behavior of the machine. So the key parts of the behavior of the machine are how much head and flow it produces. And that was done in a number of steps. So first of all, we predict the head and flow of its best efficiency point, where it's, its most efficient operating point for a given site. And from that, then we produce this curve of its variation in head and flow and efficiency. And from that prediction, then we can let's say we predicted, I do my pointer again. We predicted this sort of QH space. And within the QH space, our software came up with an infinite number, well, not an infinite number, but a large number of theoretical pumps as turbines. So every sort of point within that bluish contour plot is a theoretical pump as turbine, which may or may not exist in the market. And again, the key advantage is we have to get an actual pump that is in the market, is mass produced to avail of the energy saving. And so we mapped these theoretical ones versus what we knew existed, like these two happen to exist. So in theory, this might be the best place, I can hold my hand still, to produce energy with a pack, but maybe there isn't one right there, so we have to pick the closest one. So we did this we developed a custom-built test rig in our building just nearby here, try and test a number of pump as turbines. The dark blue guy is the pump as turbine. We cannot see, but there's a water tank here, off the shot, a kind of a hydraulic circuit that pumps things around, and we tested a number in reverse. We used that, the results of those tests to formulate an algorithm that makes some predictions and predicts very well the performance of quite a large number of pump as turbines. That we can then use to make these this is an example from Italy, Daniele, a water treatment example in Italy. So if we look at the contours here, everywhere in this contour is a theoretical pump as turbine that would produce an amount of energy corresponding to the color. And the actual little circles are actual pumps available in the market. And so we mapped the theoretical performance to the actual ones. And the next step was to try out the software in the field. So we developed the software, it makes a prediction, and we were confident that it's going to work. I said the previous examples had failed. Their accuracy was plus or minus 30%, and we were down to plus or minus 9, maybe, or so. But plus or minus 9 is good enough when we are availing. There's a certain amount of leeway in here that would work. So we tried this out at a number of places. The first one was Blackstairs Group Water Scheme in the Wicklow or Wexford Mountains. This one at the top. And so it produces a small number of kilowatts, but it's enough to account for 20% to a quarter of the energy needs of the plant. And so that was free energy that was flowing down the mountains there for a long time and just spilling into a raw water tank. Again, if you want to see the full site with the various components, there are videos online, and you can go to the poster outside in the lobby. We made a bypass. We took the raw water to flow through our turbine, it takes that excess head out of it and produces some energy for the site. Underneath is a run-of-river plant. We did a Timor Wibernant. So my Welsh has gotten a little bit better over the years. I can say some of these names, but a little not beyond that. Under the nice looking little bridge there is a river that flows past this 15th century farmhouse, which housed at the time the first translation of the Bible into Welsh. So it's a very culturally important heritage site owned by the National Trust. The energy demand there was to keep the house at a certain temperature and humidity to preserve the Bible, and is a very isolated location. So we used the available river, and again through a conventional small hydropower design, to more or less hidden away in the woods behindhand, so as not to detract from the tourism attraction of it, built another pumpless turbine. So these worked very well on the basis of the softwares. So that's, I'm not sure how I was doing for time, but that's the engineering side. I'm going to hand over to Paul, to Professor, to mention a little bit about the policy side.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Brian, for the welcome to the Bangor team. Mae wedi bod yn bleser cael dod yma I ddilyn dros y blynyddoedd. Dwi'n dod yma ers blynyddoedd maith rwan. It's been a pleasure coming here to Dublin for many years, 10 years and more, to work with great colleagues in Trinity College. We at Bangor University have been really proud to be part of this fantastic project. And I'm sad to see it coming to an end, but you know, there's lots of great outputs and so on, and strong legacies for the project, that's for sure. And also, yeah, fel Cymro, as a Welshman, I enjoyed the singing very much in particular. I might join in the second half, who knows. Diolch yn fawr, thank you. Right, so yes, Angus has talked a lot about the engineering side of things. What we in Bangor University brought to the team, brought to the table, so to speak, was our work in the environmental sciences in particular. And that's, I think, one of the strengths of the project. It's been two universities working together, and sort of there's been a real collaboration all the way through and capitalizing on one another's strengths. And, you know, we've been working in the area of carbon footprinting and, well, the environmental sciences for many, many years at Bangor, but we haven't got an engineering department. So there's an obvious sort of collaboration there, and obviously linking with Trinity Business School has also been very, that was great insight. So for the next session, if you like, we're going to focus on the environmental insights for industry and policy, because there are some messages here, I guess, for both industry and for policymakers, and it's good to hear, you know, it was good to see the clip from Lee Waters, the Deputy Minister for Climate Change at the Welsh Government earlier on. He is a very influential person in the Welsh Government, and he's obviously very much aware of the project and the outputs of the project. Felly, ffwrdd ni, off we go. So, first of all, Angus has touched a lot on the, as I say, the technical side of things, but here what we wanted to do, broadly speaking, at Bangor was to get a better handle on the environmental benefits of implementing these fantastic technologies, okay? Because clearly there's a lot of emphasis on economic gains and savings, cost savings and so on. But of course, we all live in a world these days where there's great emphasis on the environmental benefits, and that's what we wanted to get a better handle of in this particular project. So if we think about the Penrhyn Castle example that Angus has just referred to, okay, tens of thousands of visitors every year, tens of thousands of cups of tea and coffee and so on are made. You've got some large water users in the hospitality sector. If you just think of the city of Dublin, okay, how many teas and coffees are made every day in the city of Dublin across the various hotels and so on. Potentially, if we can implement this technology appropriately, there's real environmental gains to be made as well. And the Bangor team, we've been staying in what is reputedly, it says on the wall anyway, Dublin or Ireland even's first net zero hotel. Not sure whether it is or not, but that's where we've been staying. I won't say the name of the hotel. But the hospitality sector is under pressure to improve its environmental performance, essentially. And there's no doubt these days that companies in all kinds of different sectors, be it hotels, be it, the car industry, be it energy, be it the water industry, they're all trying to outdo each other in terms of their environmental performance. So to focus for a bit on the hospitality sector, commercial kitchens, we could install, as Angus said, heat recovery systems in commercial kitchens. But of course, if we do so, we have, it's additional infrastructure that comes at some cost. That infrastructure doesn't sort of fall from the sky. It has to be made, multiple components, maybe bought in from different parts of the world and so on. But we wanted to look at the environmental cost of installing that kind of infrastructure versus the environmental benefits, and ultimately see what the trade-off or the net benefits were. So Isabel, who's here at the front, she has been working on life cycle assessment methodology. So one thing that we hear a lot about these days is carbon footprints and the focus on climate change. But sometimes what can happen is that we substitute one environmental problem for another. Okay, sort of blindingly, sort of single focus on climate change mitigation actually can cause a problem elsewhere. And there are multiple examples out there that we've worked on, which find you're essentially pollution swapping. Okay, so a life cycle assessment approach is a much broader approach than just looking at carbon and just looking at one particular element. And that's what Isabel has been focusing on. So we wanted to see what the environmental savings were from installing these heat recovery systems to commercial kitchens using this life cycle assessment approach. So that takes into account, yes, the carbon savings or costs and savings, but also the impacts on resource depletion, on acidification, on eutrophication, and a whole range of different environmental impacts, and sort of look at them from a holistic way, as opposed to a sort of narrow-minded, single-focus way. So you can see the heat recovery system on the left-hand side of the screen here. There's raw materials that need to be extracted, manufacturing of the infrastructure that has to be transported, packaged, transported again, ultimately it reaches the end of its life. At some stage, what happens to it thereafter? Does it get recycled? What is recyclable? What's not recyclable? And so on. So those are the costs, essentially. Okay, there's an environmental cost to every single step there. But if they can be installed to replace energy in commercial kitchens, then possibly if that kitchen is conventionally heating their water through natural gas or through electricity, then there are potentially carbon savings there. Quite a few commercial kitchens have actually, and Penrhyn Castle is a good example, they heat their water through burning wood pellets. Okay, so some commercial kitchens have tried to reduce their use of natural gas and electricity and so on due to cost savings, but also environmental benefits from doing so. So actually, if we install these heat recovery systems in a kitchen that has already moved towards decarbonising or reducing their reliance on fossil fuels, is there a carbon saving there? That's what we wanted to look at. Most environmental burdens, okay, the environmental costs, if you like, were as expected from the mining operations to produce copper parts associated with these heat recovery systems. Okay, but if that copper that is needed is sourced from recovered or recycled copper, then that obviously reduces the environmental burden in that particular sense. If it's a large system or a small compact system that is needed, there's obviously more infrastructure needed or less infrastructure needed. And again, that influences on the environmental costs and therefore the environmental payback. But in a nutshell, in one sentence, Okay, if we can have smart, compactly designed systems, then for sure Isabel's work showed that there was a real significant environmental payback, a real positive payback in installing these systems. So, as I say, adding to the work that the Trinity team did on the engineering side, we added some data and information on the environmental benefits. And you know, what if that commercial kitchen is already not using natural gas to heat its water, it's using wood pellets, for instance, or geothermal systems? Well, again, the heat recovery, the environmental payback was still positive. Okay, so even when replacing renewable systems, these heat recovery systems have environmental benefits. And Isabel looked to see the kind of scale of system that would be needed. And again, in a nutshell, only very small kitchens. It was only in very small kitchens, really, that the environmental payback wasn't positive. So there are potentially thousands of kitchens out there, thousands of kitchens in, well, probably hundreds of kitchens in Dublin this morning that could be installing these systems and could help move them towards being net zero. It'd be interesting to see if that hotel that we've stayed in has a heat recovery system. We can maybe go back and ask them later on. So big potential for energy savings and associated environmental benefits. And if you want to try and convert that, look at it in a different currency, if you like, about 500,000 tons of CO2 equivalents per year if every UK food outlet installed these systems. And what does that equate to? About 250,000 cars off the road every year. So we are talking about pretty significant figures and numbers here. It's not just, you know, sort of playing around the edges. We are talking about real potential benefits. And I'm sure Irish governments, Welsh governments, you know, big ambitious targets towards moving towards net zero and so on. These kinds of figures matter. So yes, lots of kitchens out there that could be doing this. So why are they not? Especially when such concern the hospitality sector is facing with energy costs. So why isn't everybody rushing out to do this? Possibly a lack of awareness, possibly a lack of sort of ideas to whether it's relevant to them, whether it's possible to them, or do you have to be a certain scale, a certain size, and it's only then that these systems are viable. So Isabel developed a tool or a calculator that's available for free. So if you are a hotel owner, then you can go on that particular website and you can actually look to see with pretty little data needed whether this is a goer for you. So if you've got an idea of your water consumption every year, you know how much you're paying for energy and the type of energy or the source of energy that you are using, you can input that information into the tool here, and the tool will tell you this is the potential heat recovery that you have, this is the financial savings and the payback time that it would have. Okay, there's a cost initially, but it is an investment that the cost is recovered, and likewise from an environmental perspective as well. So both a financial and an environmental cost and savings and payback time perspective. So what we hope is that a lot of commercial kitchens can answer that question themselves. They can go use this tool. Is heat recovery sustainable for my kitchen? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, then hopefully, you know, that will lead to much bigger rollouts of these kind of technologies and huge environmental and economic benefits in doing so. So another sector that Isabel worked with was the distillery sector. If you think about it, we could probably all live without distilleries. Okay, life wouldn't be as enjoyable as it is now. But it's a kind of unnecessary expense in terms of the environment and so on. So the distillery sector is probably one of those sectors that is under a bit of scrutiny. It uses a lot of energy, a lot of water to produce a product that we could actually do without. Okay, so it's probably going to have to up its game over the years to come. in terms of reducing its environmental impact. So it's a really interesting industry to look at, to focus on. And again, similar types of questions really. What savings, environmental savings could be made in this particular sector? But here, the focus was on not just on carbon, but also on water. There's a big user of water and obviously very relevant to this particular project. But what some distilleries have done, and there's no shortage of examples of these, is they've installed anaerobic digestion systems, bioenergy systems of different sorts, to again try and reduce their costs, but also highlight to the world what they're doing in terms of investing in green technology and so on. So there's more and more byproducts from this sector going into bioenergy now, and less going into cattle feed. So what does that actually mean? Well, cattle feed has to be sourced from elsewhere. Okay, and this is high quality cattle feed. So the alternative might be soy imported from another part of the world. Okay, so Isabel wanted to sort of look at the kind of trade-offs, if you like, when you substitute what is a byproduct from the distillery sector, possibly just down the road, when that product isn't then available because it's gone into bioenergy for green credentials, so to speak, but that product has to be substituted for cattle feed from a product possibly causing environmental damage elsewhere in the world. And really, in summary, I won't go through all the graphs, there's quite a few bits of detail there, but again, if you look at the last bullet point, pretty substantial savings to be made if all byproducts from the UK potable alcohol production was used as feed. So this is a message that we try to get over to few distilleries, okay? You don't always need to invest in the fancy technology and bioenergy systems and so on. Using it as cattle feed is actually the best thing to do from an environmental perspective. Possibly doesn't sound quite as sexy, okay, but it's the best thing to do from an environmental perspective. So again, a really important message to industry, I would say. Now, last but not least, with Isabel's work, she worked very closely with one company, one distillery in particular, which is Arbiki. Again, a distillery that is really sort of pushing the boundaries in terms of environmental performance and so on. It's a big sector in the UK. It's a big sector over here in Ireland as well, of course, but we have a lot of small-scale distilleries in the UK that are very reliant on fossil fuels. We use a lot of fossil fuels. And to remember what we said a few moments ago, this is a sector in theory that we could do without, okay, but it's a big user of fossil fuels. So what Isabel looked at here was the installation of a heat recovery system, and again looking at the kind of costs and benefits of those, and the results were significant savings in fuel, in electricity, in water evaporation, and of course in associated carbon emissions and so forth. So financial payback under 2 years. Okay, if you're a financial director of a distillery thinking, right, how am I going to invest in green systems and so on, that is really appealing. I mean, what can we invest in that has under 2 years of a payback? There's not many things out there. So again, really relevant, applicable, and valuable research to industry. And yeah, 47,000 tons of CO2 equivalent savings per year if applied across all malt whisky distilleries. So that was Isabel's work, but a bit more to it than that, I'm sure, Isabel, but try to summarize as much as possible. But Nathan, who is here, who's the official photographer today, he has been looking at benchmarking, and you might be thinking, why benchmarking? Well, it can be useful to improve efficiency, expose areas for improvement, and identify best practice. It's something that I work a lot in agricultural research, and there's a lot of emphasis on benchmarking all kinds of agricultural businesses now because of these benefits. So if you talk about the water industry or agricultural industry or many other industries, the benefits of benchmarking have long been known. Comparing yourself with others and learning from others and sharing best practice and so on. But it's been surprisingly, there's surprisingly little of this that has been done across the water industry. Probably a reason being there's some commercial sensitivity and so on. Companies may not be wanting to share best practice in all cases. So we wanted to improve benchmarking methodologies, and we worked or looked at 12 to 17 companies from 2014 onwards, looking at their environmental as well as economic indicators. So again, you know, the water industry under big pressure to reduce its environmental footprint, also under pressure to provide dividends for their shareholders. So economic and environmental performance is really important for the water sector. I mean, Dŵr Cymru, Welsh Water, has hugely ambitious targets to reduce its carbon emissions by 2050. Hugely ambitious. So it's going to need to be very active in this particular field. So what did Nathan find? Well, companies could reduce economic inputs by 19% and carbon outputs by 16%. So, as I say, some of these water companies have got targets way beyond 16%, but it was seen from this benchmarking comparisons, different companies, that some are out there doing it already, or at least moving much further ahead than others. Over the time period study, it was seen that the water sector has improved its productivity or efficiency, if you like, some much more than others. So some are way ahead of the pack. Okay, so what are we going to do to drag the tail, to move everybody towards the right direction, given that the water industry, as Angus said earlier on, is such an important contributor to national greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, this is really important work. So another thing that happened during this project, of course, was COVID. And Nathan and a few others, we were discussing, well, how has COVID impacted on the water sector in the UK and Ireland? And this idea obviously evolved as the project evolved. So we looked to see what their response was during the COVID period, how they we looked at 18 different indicators for the water sector across the UK and Ireland, and how they responded to COVID, because it was unprecedented, of course. Okay, demand, there's a huge shift in demand, people working from home and so on, hotels, big water users not open and so forth. So unprecedented new territory for the water sector in the UK and Ireland. And what was seen was that financial performance was impacted significantly. Declines in interest cover ratio and profit as seen there, but actually some areas improved. Unplanned outage, sewer storm flooding risk decreasing. Some of that might be climate related or weather related more actually than the performance of the companies directly. But nevertheless, some really interesting insights. But again, big diversity. Some companies performing much better than others. So there's a lot of focus in Wales and in the UK for sure. Not sure if it's just quite the same in Ireland. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts later on. But there's a lot of talk in our part of the world about water companies releasing raw sewage, possibly a bit of a post-Brexit thing, but we won't get into that. But there is scrutiny on the water companies now to be investing in capital projects, and it's multi-billion pound euro investments that is needed. So, you know, this sort of work fed into those kind of discussions about prioritizing different needs at different times as well. So we expanded a bit further. We wanted to see what other the water sector was doing in other parts of the world. So Nathan looked a bit further on then from just the UK and Ireland, and looked at 321 companies from 31 countries across the world. So are there practices going on in some parts of the world that we could benefit from learning from in the UK, in Wales, and in Ireland. So what was seen, what Nathan saw, was that countries or member states of the EU generally had the largest average footprint, if you like, the largest average cost in terms of treating wastewater. But that is partially a result of the fact that EU standards are often very high relative to other countries in the world. Okay, so it inevitably means that there's greater energy costs needed to reach those standards. So what it was also shown, though, was that those costs can be mitigated, and mitigated very well. So Norway is a particularly good example. They have got very high wastewater standards, but they've also got a very clean grid, very green grid, electricity grid. Okay, so they achieve the high standards at low environmental costs. So there's some, really interesting and pertinent messages for the wastewater sector in Ireland, in Wales, and indeed for the government as well. So a clean grid and investments in renewable technologies at treatment plants can mean that these companies can reach high effluent standards, but at a much reduced environmental cost than currently. And then last but not least, Nathan was looking at the cross-sector benchmarking. So you might think, well, what can water companies, the water sector, learn from other sectors, such as communication, for example? Well, they've both got lots of huge infrastructure. They operate on large scale. They've got multiple users and so on. So again, it's something that's very healthy to do, is to compare across sectors as opposed to being insular and only looking inwards. So Nathan looked at 21 different metrics, spanning a range of informational data on environmental performance, economic performance, and looked at different sectors. And he's very proud of generating this particular graphic, very fancy graphic. But essentially what Nathan showed was that there were two distinct clusters. Okay, some that were very much ahead of the pack and others. And again, useful insights for industry to go out there and see, okay, that company might be in communications and we're in the water sector. What are they doing really well in terms of infrastructure investments that we can learn from? So again, the cross-pollination of ideas and so on, which I guess, fits the remit of this project very well. Okay, so 2 areas left, one of which was work that Uisce has led on energy auditing and rating. And as we have heard already, homes and the built environments, big users of energy and water. So this was a project focusing on citizen science in Irish homes. Okay, and we do know that if we can change behaviour at households and get investments in the right technology, then we can reduce the size of the blue in the pie chart here quite considerably. Our homes are responsible for huge demand of energy, and a lot of that energy demand is associated with water demand. Okay, so we wanted to see whether households associated water use with energy use or not. And this was a study done with over 300 households across Ireland, across the Republic of Ireland, and the responses that we had were representative of the population of Ireland in terms of demographics and geographical coverage and so on. And we sort of used contacts across Ireland to spread the message and to get people involved in this citizen science project. The findings were interesting, to say the least. So less than 1/3 of respondents knew if they had a water meter at all. And I think it's about 20% of homes in Ireland do have a water meter. And it's been shown that where water meters have been installed, then by extension, people think more about water usage and therefore about energy, essentially about energy usage as well. Almost 40% of respondents had no idea how much water they used, no idea. Okay, and I'm sure lots of those respondents would consider themselves as climate conscious and environmentally aware, but they had no idea how much water they were using. Okay, and therefore, you know, a lot of the energy that they were using that was associated with that water consumption. So 88% thought that there was moderate to little relationship between the two. So we've talked a lot about infrastructure and investments and technology and new systems and so on. It's fantastic. It's really important. It's obviously part of the mix. But sometimes we just need to raise awareness of what we already got. We don't always need fancy new shiny technology. Yeah, it's about communication. So that's maybe a clear message for the water industry, but in particular for government, for universities and so on. Yeah, it's not always shiny technology that we need. It's raising awareness. That is a really important message. A sector that is obviously a big user of water is the leisure sector. And Uisce has worked with the leisure centre in the last few months and years. And I'm sure it's the same over here in Ireland, but back home in Wales, public leisure centres are under huge pressure. Many of them are facing imminent closure. It's sort of, you know, it's just on the doorstep really, and possibly even permanent closure because of the energy crisis. They are huge users of energy. Okay, they obviously provide hugely important service to the community, benefits to health and so on, mental health, physical health, but they're a sector under huge pressure. A lot of them have got aging infrastructure. They're not efficient at all in terms of their energy usage. And Uisce looked at the water and energy use of 7 centres in Wales in a fair bit of detail. And just to take home 2 messages from or findings from the work that Uisce did on that was, if you think about the evaporation that goes on in a pool, okay, water is constantly being heated, it's constantly evaporating, water has to be replaced, that has to be heated again, it's just never ending. And it's a huge proportion of their water and energy needs as a result of the degree of evaporation that takes place. So Uisce has looked at how to optimize evaporation in indoor leisure pools, depending on humidity and how many users there are and so on. And, you know, there are some potentially quite significant savings that can be made from an economic perspective. But also these leisure centres are often owned by local authorities. These local authorities have often pledged to be net zero by 2030, 40, 50. Okay, so they're always thinking about carbon emissions and so on as well. So big economic and environmental savings that can be made if targeted investment is done in the right place at the right time. And then last but not least, from Bangor is the work that Richard has worked on, or led on, I should say. Climate change, we know the predictions for milder, wetter winters, hotter, drier summers, and so on, more extreme periods of drought, more extreme floods. This obviously is going to impact on stream flows, has implications for those people that rely on streams, for hydropower, we'll come to in a minute, for agriculture and so on, leisure tourism, and of course the environment and the ecological impacts that come from that. If we think about hydropower, to take one of those, then about 5% of the UK of energy generation was from hydropower in 2021, a bit more for Ireland, 6.5%. So again, there are ambitions to grow the hydropower sector in Ireland and ambitious to grow the hydropower plans to grow the hydropower sector in Wales and the UK. So relatively small, but the plan is to increase that further. And of course, there's lots of benefits from hydropower systems. So Richard looked to see how these predictions for extreme droughts, extreme floods and so on, how that would impact on stream flow for 585 catchments across the island of Ireland and Great Britain. Okay, looking at the worst case scenario, the predictions for worst case scenario, how would that impact on stream water flow in these particular catchments? And looking ahead into the future, so this is up to 2080, 2021 to 2080, there is a divide, a northwest southeast divide for Great Britain, and there is a gradient for the island of Ireland as well. So more problematic, more extreme conditions in terms of stream flow, longer periods of low stream flow and potentially longer periods of high stream flow as well, and nothing much maybe in between or less in between. So yeah, summarised sort of what the impacts would be across the different countries of the UK and of Ireland. And of course, you know, there is the plan to grow this hydropower industry, but we can't do that unless we've got a sufficient amount of water. And this is where this abstraction license conditions come in. Okay, so there are certain rules as to how much water that can be abstracted from streams and rivers for hydropower. So if our streams and rivers are going to suffer from different flows, then what does that actually mean then for our run-of-river hydropower schemes? This, you know, this area that we want to grow much more of to provide clean energy and so on. So Richard looked at the license conditions in different countries, coupled that with the predictions for different flows, and look to see what the implications would be for hydropower schemes. And in a nutshell, essentially, much greater seasonality, net gain, slight net gain for Great Britain, decline for Ireland. Okay, and this is really important when we're thinking ahead about our investments in run-of-river hydropower schemes. Do we design them for now, or do we design them for the future? And in the future, we'll have very different stream flows potentially. Okay, so it helps really feed into the discussion about how we grow a sector that we collectively do want to grow. So yes, implications for water resources, particularly for some sectors. It'll vary spatially, might enable companies to target their investment better. Okay, looking at the maps, look to see which catchments are going to be suffering less than others. And this point about the third point about run-of-river schemes should be designed with future stream flows in mind. If you want to design a run-of-river scheme now, you look at historical data. You look at how much it's rained over the last 10 or 20 years. You should be looking at how much it's going to rain in the next 10 or 20 years. And already some investments are not returning what they were predicted to do so, because they're already seeing different stream flows now compared to where we were a few years ago. So this is incredibly useful and relevant work for the industry in particular. But it's a tricky balance to get right. Okay, and this kind of work can help inform those discussions. Felly, hefo hynny, I'd drosodd I Paul with those few words. Let's summarise what we've done. There's much more, but summarised in what we've done at Bangor, and I'll hand over to Paul. Diolch, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. We're right on the afternoon. Good afternoon, welcome. My name is Paul Coughlin. Oh, I'd better stay in the middle. Thank you, Madhu. I'm used to walking around. Good afternoon, my name is Paul Coughlin, and I'm a faculty member here at Trinity Business School, so welcome to our home. We've been in this building since 2019, and then COVID hit in 2020 and it was empty, but we're back and it's wonderful to see you here in person with us this afternoon. You've heard from Angus and from Prisor about what we have done and the impact of what it is that we've been doing together over the past number of years. What I want to focus on for the next few minutes is how we went about it as researchers and as practitioners collaborating together. And our challenge in many ways was how, as researchers, can we design and implement a research initiative and produce quality research-based green process innovation. And we've been hearing about the different innovations that the team in collaboration with the practitioners have worked on over the past number of years. Our response to that in Gaelic and Irish is Ní neart go cur le céile. Now, Prisor, I wouldn't dare to attempt the Welsh translation of that. It would be? Well done. And Richard, where's Richard? And Richard, our designated Englishman. Yeah, so Ní neart go cur le céile. And our challenge was, how do we do it? Well, the answer is together. And positioning that challenge, you have sensed very clearly from the presentations that colleagues have shared with you this morning, the complexity of the project, the number of different perspectives and technologies and ideas and presence of data, absence of data, and so on. And that was a challenge. But putting it in perspective, we're inquiring into a complex phenomenon here. And it's of great societal interest. And that requires new research designs. It requires that we think about it and go about it differently. And in particular, this research associated with green process innovations requires us to work together, to work across disciplinary boundaries, to work with practitioners, and in particular, to get involved in practice. And this kind of research is of increasing relevance, and many, if not all of you, will be familiar with the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals and our research-based responses to these challenges and goals require us to work together in new and different ways. So what was our opportunity? And green process innovation was very much at the center of what we were doing. And we were hoping to mitigate the environmental impacts of water production and consumption. But we were also interested in demonstrating, and this is a key feature of the project, demonstrating the commercial and environmental performance of the bright ideas that we were coming up with. Because if you stand back from what colleagues shared with you earlier, there were bright ideas, they were simulated, they were tried out in the laboratory, and then they were implemented in practice. And monitoring and data gathering, data generation took place. So for us, green process innovation wasn't just coming up with the bright idea, but also demonstrating that commercial and environmental performance. And to achieve that through our complex but collaborative process of engagement. And all of that, if we want to put a label on it, would be recognized by some as being transdisciplinary research, which, as you see there, it's a quote from an article in the Journal of Product Innovation Management, and the title of it was Harnessing Differences. And in a sense, you get that. Innovation for environmental sustainability requires firms to engage with external stakeholders to access expertise, solve complex problems, and gain social legitimacy, to harness those differences. And as we go into, because this is about telling you how we went about it, engaging in transdisciplinary research, then there are 6 different, I suppose, dimensions that would characterize what we did and what we went and how we went about it. There was a breadth of and diversity in the interdisciplinarity, the number of disciplines involved. There was a depth, and as you can see, even from the work that both Angus and Prisor has presented, there was quite a deal of within discipline work, but also the linkages that you will have heard about what one researcher was doing that was relevant to the research of somebody else. So Prisar talking about Richard's work in catchment areas, impacting upon Daniele's work in terms of micro hydropower. Without an initiative like this, they wouldn't have been talking to each other. There was the degree of interaction between the academic or the researcher and the commercial, the non-academic partners, which was central to this, most especially if we were bringing the ideas out of the laboratory and into practice. There was the composition of the partnerships that we had and the timing of their engagement in the work itself and the types of knowledge being emphasized. The team, and some of them are here, spanned 5 disciplines. What disciplines, if I could ask you, what disciplines would you think make up the 5? This is me being regular module leader in class. So no marks for participation. What disciplines have you heard about this morning? Engineering, good. Business, good. Computer science, yep, very good. 3, environmental science, yeah. And the G word, geography. Yeah, so there were our 5 that we had. And here is the group that we had. Missing from the photograph are a number of the postdocs and PhDs who have passed through the project en route. And our collaborators came from across the water and the energy network, because, you know, they're comprised of their water users, their water producers in here, and they're educators, and I'll come back to that in just a moment, social organizations, households. So quite a range of different organizations, for all of whom what we were doing was relevant, and for us, their experience was incredibly relevant as well. Roberta, some of these collaborators came from surprising areas and they offer us hope. Roberta Bellini, one of our researchers here. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. As Paul said, we had collaborators from schools as well, so young people that are giving us hope. The project that we worked on, worked with my colleague Uisce, was a climate action hackathon program. So the idea was trialed out in summer 2020, and then we decided that yes, it was successful. So we wanted to develop it into a program that could be rolled out to secondary schools in Ireland and Wales. But to combine a lot of the things that have been told by Paul, Angels, and Prisor, we wanted to raise awareness, but we wanted to hear from the people that we were going to engage with, so the young people, what they thought about what we were doing, what was relevant for them, and what their ideas were. So that's how we came about with the co-creating the program with young people. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Claire Grant of New Park Comprehensive School in Blackrock in County Dublin, and the students who took part in our co-creation activity of the Climate Action Hackathon program last school year. And I'm very delighted to welcome Millie and Robert, 2 of the students who co-created the program and took part in the hackathon themselves and were the winners of the hackathons in their school. So if you want to come down for a second. Here is on the slide, and also is a poster upstairs in the foyer. So I invite everyone to go and look at the poster and ask questions, ask for feedback. I'm not going to say if the program was successful or not. You're going to ask them later on, or in case you want to say anything.
Yeah. Move into the middle. Yeah.
I think it's really important to get the voice of young people heard. Now, some might say we don't have enough education, we're not smart enough to engage in projects like this. But I think all the work we've done, so many schools have participated in this. And if you go upstairs to the lobby, you can see all of our posters and all of our different ideas. It's our generation that are facing issues of water crisis. We will be dealing with this, and some of you will be dealing with this too. It's part of everyone's role to engage with dealing with water crisis. So our idea was AquaTrack, as you can see from the screen there. It was similar to our ideas to measure water usage levels. Nowadays, everything's online. It's digital. That's the main factor in our project. Young people use their phones every day. As you know, some of you use their phones quite often, many hours a day. So we decided to measure it, give notifications on an app connected to your water meter. You can see daily factors and statistics about your water use. And the main selling point of our meter was you had a goal to save as much water as possible. Now, if you met that goal and you actually saved a significant amount of water, you could therefore donate or save. The government could give you some money, or you could donate water to people who need it. So how would that work? So if you saved enough water, you'd be given maybe a few euros, and you could have the opportunity to donate that to people who need it. Now, why is that important? Now, obviously, there's financial incentive to do this, but I think a few euros is not going to affect most people. They can make it easily. But it's more, if you see people who do not have water, 1 in 10 people don't have access to safe water, which is significantly higher than it should be. By donating a few euros, by saving water, it's more an incentive to actually save. As you can see, the real world effects of your saving and giving out a small amount of money can really, really help, which is why I thought it was so important that you can see the effects of your water saving. So, just to
add what Robert said, I think what really makes it different from like what the government water charges which were implemented was the benefits that come with it, and kind of how young people would react to it, because a lot of people didn't react well to the government charges because it was kind of implemented as something that was obligatory, and it was not really seen as a positive thing, but as a program that has benefits and that kind of is able to educate the people who are going through it as well. It's a lot easier to get people on board with it. So.
Thank you, everyone.
So reaching parts of society that really are hugely relevant to the objective of the project. So working together as researchers in line with our practitioners, we've heard a lot this morning about wastewater heat recovery. And how did we go about actually undertaking that work? And you've heard about Penryn Castle, you've heard about the toolkit for the commercial kitchens. So we recognized that there was a lot going on. Now, I don't expect you to read this particular spreadsheet because it's only a postage stamp fragment of the wider data set that we collected, trying to track who did what, with whom, and when, and trying to capture across, you remember the 6 characteristics of a transdisciplinary research initiative. Well, then these are under those 6 across all of the various actions that were going on, who was involved at the different stages, with whom and when and with what impact and so on. So we captured all of that, and we tried also to visualize it. And we recognized that our interactions were dynamic. Now, this is a static picture of an approach which was led, and Deirdre, you were correct with the computer science. This is where computer science came in. And Alex and Panos from Bangor both did a wonderful piece of work extracting from that previous spreadsheet the basis for saying here in the 2 rectangles or squares are the work packages and the activities going on within them. Here in that, and I call it a murmuration, here in that murmuration are all of the external voices that are involved in making this particular piece of the research happen. And so we modeled this and we tracked it, and we can, there's a dynamic version of this where we can actually show the evolution of the relationships and the knowledge exchange over time. So that's how we went about it. And as we engaged in this action, and in many ways, you know, this action was taking us from bright idea through the simulation and all the way to the delivery of some of the innovations that we've seen. What did we learn? We learned that the 5 discipline groups working with the practitioners were generating different kinds of knowledge, disciplinary knowledge within the engineering or the environmental science disciplines, crossing paths with each other and going a little bit deeper, and then interacting directly with the practitioners in terms of taking it to the next stage and trying it out. We integrated that knowledge through hardware, software, humanware. Hardware, the demonstration units that Angus showed you are really an example of hardware to show and tell. The software, and we heard about the tool that Daniele developed for characterizing pumps as turbines, and a number of other tools in there to allow us to make sense out of what we were seeing. And humanware, the interaction of people. And from all the way from the school through to water users and water producers. We engaged in collective decision-making around what we were doing, and we communicated with each other and exchanged information all along the way. Roberta, whom you saw just a moment ago, tried in her way to visualize what was going on and sketched this flower pot, as we called it. And it's like an ecosystem. Angus earlier made reference to an earlier project, HydroBPT. HydroBPT, in a sense, was the foundation for Uisce. Uisce itself is the pot within which the rich environment for the creativity that we've seen has emerged. And all of the team members with their T profiles, great discipline expertise, and an ability to act and interact with each other are stuck in the ground there, but growing. And out of that come all of the various ideas and the funding, and the sun is there, that's the Ireland Wales Fund. The sun and the funding coming in helps them all to grow. And then we have the practitioners. They're the buzzy bees, what you're there, flying around and going from one plant to the next and asking a different kind of question. So that's our ecosystem. So on reflection then of what we've been doing, managing a piece of work like this requires a climate, a particular climate for interaction, for integration, and for formation of partnerships. That interaction is not once a year, it's frequent, it's data-driven, it's respectful of each other. And the timing of it is not just driven by the Gantt chart for the project, but also by the interesting ideas that come up. So our publications tell part of the story, and our continuing involvement, which we've heard of, will drive the issues forward. And one step that we are planning is to launch a new cross-border venture. Can anybody figure out what Uisce means?
It's like a fire project, I think. But they organize like a big event, and people could enroll.
But it's not online.
It's in person.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Uisce.
Thank you.
No, in the biggest one.
Okay, Madhu? Yeah, okay, fair enough. So we're planning this new cross-border venture, and Uisce stands for the moment Water, Energy, Holistic Education, Auditing and Training. And so consultancy and expert training and education, we have a lot that we've developed together and that we will share together and that we can take forward from this. So that's as much as I wanted to say. I began by saying, Níneart gur cur le chéile, and hopefully I've illustrated that. And I want to finish with a quote from a very interesting book, which some of you might be really interested to read, by two Danish researchers, Hansen and Madsen, about theorizing in organization studies. But I think their quote, and I've substituted knowledge production for theorizing, their quote speaks to what I wanted to say. In order for knowledge production to be successful, it has to be picked up by the community and further developed through communal efforts. So on to our next challenge together. Thank you. Okay, Angus.
You want to, yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can keep that on.
yeah, I keep that. Okay, oh, we have to stay somewhere close to the center. Yeah.
Maybe I'll hold on to this.
Yeah, good. Okay, so we've done a lot of speaking over the past hour or so. I guess, have you questions for us? And see Angus, myself, Prasar, as in a way conduits to the wider research team. So we have a few minutes just to raise some questions, and then we'll invite the choir starting to form behind, and we'll invite them to close the event. But any questions that come to mind at this point? About the engineering side, about the environmental side, about the implications for practice, about the education side. Any questions?
We do have one online question.
Yes.
All right. Why don't we go with that? It'll be for both Angus and Prezor. It's from Helena Ramos. I think she's from the University of Lisbon.
yes.
She says it'll be very interesting to get both cost savings and decarbonization values. I think this is related to Isabel's work, maybe, and Jan's. More so with the installed power value. I think you had like energy related values, maybe in kilowatt hours. And I think she's talking more about whether that was a consideration of installed capacity as well, alongside of just kilowatt hours there.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks. Hello, Helena. Well, Helena, I know for a long time from Portugal. So we had a lot of different technologies that have different payback periods and embedded carbons and so on. So it's hard to answer that in a general way. I mean, one example. So I spoke about the hydropower and heat recovery, but I showed a picture of the hydropower plant at T-Mauer in Wales. Turbine, their cost, I think about, was it about £2,000, Daniele? I think roughly £2,000. How that whole thing evolved through our interaction with the National Trust is that they wanted to put in a hydropower plant there, and they were going to go with a conventional machine, and we convinced them to go with pumps as turbines at the time, even though there was a certain risk there. But the alternative was 20,000. So you know, we transformed proved that it worked. We didn't know at the time that it would fully work, but proved that it would work, but transformed by a factor of 10. You know, the cost of all of that. So that's on the hydropower example. On heat recovery, I mean, it really depends on the setting as to and the fuel cost, but our payback period in Penryn Castle was pretty short. In ABP, we have some more development work to do. We were a little bit further down the track. Carbon.
Yeah, well, the environmental payback, carbon payback is often being shorter than the economic payback. So it's essentially a no-brainer from an environmental perspective.
Number of months, really, versus the years.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Helena.
And also says hello back to you.
Yeah, well, we know Helena well. Daniele knows her well. Yes.
Karan Bereli from UCD. it's an excellent project. I was, well, actually attended the first meeting, the very first meeting. And now this is the closing meeting. So thanks very much for the very nice work. And well, my question is more about the wastewater, heat recovery from wastewater, especially at the plant inlet. So as you stated in your presentation, Angus, there are some implications of that, to the process. And aside from that, there is also, so there is a huge potential there, but what about the end use of the heat recovered? So will there be, a demand for the recovered heat in a wastewater treatment plant? So if it is, if it is recovered, if the heat is recovered at homes, at the apartments, it is utilized on site, but in a wastewater treatment plant, what is the demand of heat on site in the wastewater treatment plant, and what are the potential, utilization areas of the recovered heat?
Okay, two good points. So dealing with the utilization of the heat is a problem for all settings. So one of the advantages of the Penryn site, for example, was the heat exchange unit was quite close to the interface with the heating system. We were only maybe 4 or 5 meters apart. Where the distance between that is long, then you start to lose some of what you gained. We only really did one detailed case study of a treatment plant, which was one in the Midlands in Ireland, and there certainly there was much more available heat at the treatment works than there was local demand for it. Not exactly at the treatment, but within local there was local sort of housing zones. But we did that analysis on the basis of that you would require some kind of a district heating system for that. And we also, with Madhu, we had some discussions with I think the Codema group and the district heating work that's going on in Dublin. For, similar thing could be done from the Ringsend treatment plants to here, but the amount of energy is very large, and so you would need a big infrastructure to take that somewhere, which would require its own investment, because probably that heat wouldn't pay for the treatment district heating system. On your other question about the effect on the works, we didn't present it today because we didn't have time, but there's some webinars on more detail on it. We did a lot of lab work on trying to integrate heat exchangers into existing treatment processes that aren't temperature sensitive, prove that it doesn't change the dynamics. And so we're kind of at that step with some new projects starting at the minute to try and then do those on a bigger scale. And so what we did at ABP was a little bit of quite a pilot scale work. So just the very early things. And it's great to see someone right from the beginning, although there are other people who are here right from the beginning coming back. It was hard to squash 6.5 years into 2 hours or whatever we had this morning.
There are some wastewater treatment plants that have invested and possibly will be investing more in thermal treatment of waste as well. So, that's a potentially obvious use for any excess heat generated.
So yes, there aren't any other burning questions online or from the audience who want. No burning ones anyways. You can ask us later on, chance at lunchtime. So we just, as I mentioned, so the project was very long, and we have had a lot of successes because we had a lot of help along the way, and I really wanted to thank various people that helped us with that success. Probably I'll start off with the Ireland Wales funding program, right, which is, it is sad that that's coming to the end, but Paul mentioned about, we started at the desks, scale studies, and we went to the lab, and then we went to the demo sites, and we had to run those for a number of years. But really, for a normal funding project, that's very rarely possible. If you had a 1 or 2 year project, well, it's not going to really be possible to do what we did. So we had that luxury because the Ireland Wales program initially gave us 5 years funding, which turned into 6.5 years funding. And so that length of time and the level of investment in our ideas was really sort of transformative. And so that's helped our results, but it also has helped, if we go back as far as hydro BBT, I think 19 postdocs, 11 PhD students, you know, and that makes a substantial difference to their lives, you know, in their careers. I have a few photos of people I specifically wanted to thank. They're in alphabetical order up there. There aren't any favorites. But starting off with Barry Dean at the top. So Barry Dean was the head of the National Group Water Federation. They are an umbrella organization that really connected us with an awful lot of water networks in Ireland and opened many doors. And so we're very grateful to Barry and the rest of the team, Adrian and Roisin and everyone else in there. Our long-suffering project officer, Breda. Breda has been tremendously good for the project. Breda deserves a wheel of behind it. We've got an awful lot of you know, substantial funding from Ireland Wales, but we also got huge support from Breda. She really has gone well above the call of duty. So thank you, Breda. Dimpna Skelton was the manager of Blackstairs Group Water Scheme. She was also, you know, we went to meet her the first time. You know, the only answer she gave was yes. All the open doors. It was tremendous working with Breda. Keith Jones was a contact point for us in the National Trust. Professor knows very well, and we managed to meet him here recently. Again, he opened so many doors for us. He's such great energy and enthusiasm for climate initiatives. John in ABP Foods similarly supported us greatly in you know, allowing us to tinker with his wastewater treatment works and bioheat recovery down there. All through COVID as well, which was difficult for meat processing, as you can imagine. And then Mike Pedley, who helped us tremendously in the Hydro BBT project, and also at the start of this, he's the head of the energy section of Welsh Water. There are two others that I couldn't find photos for, but I would mention. One is Trina Collins, who was in, I couldn't find a photo of Trina. I don't know whether she's online.
Yeah, she is.
She helped us tremendously in connecting with various hot water users in Tipperary. And we've got a whole variety of companies. There were 250 something of them. We just selected a few logos there of the most prominent ones. And if we go all the way back, since this is end of Ireland Wales program, we go all the way back to Paul and I met someone called Roger Seddon who was in the previous Ireland Wales program at the European House on Dawson Street, and we pitched the idea, which he liked, and
he believed in us.
Years later, we have achieved a lot, and so people like him and people like Rita believing in what we had to sell made this all happen. So thank you very much, everybody, and we welcome our choir to give us a Ireland Wales sing out.
Great. Yeah, I turn it up. Is it us? Yes, yes. I'm fine. Looking forward to the next bit.
We do as well as you did.
Oh my God, that's great. Well done.
Working.
Just switch it on.
Oh, it's great to be back. And I'm sure you've had an enthralling morning. We've had an enthralling morning drinking coffee. There was a time back in the day when this choir, you wouldn't have got them back here at all. We would have been gone to a pub at 11 o'clock and you'd never seen us again. But fortunately, we're all past that now. We're going to start off by singing a contemporary piece of music in Welsh. This is In Praise of Wales It's entitled Ogumry. Thank you. We'll move on. Just a quick commercial. Anybody here based in Dublin? The Dublin Welsh Male Voice Choir rehearse every Monday night in the Royal Hospital in Donnybrook, and we're always open for new members. So please come along, you'd enjoy it. We're going to celebrate two of our literary greats now, W.B. Yeats and Dylan Thomas, by singing Sally Gardens, words composed by W.B. Yeats to a traditional tune, and a poem from Under Milkwood, which is sung unaccompanied, the Sunset Poem. Thank you. Next, we will do a rousing Welsh hymn. This is a hymn called, that some of you Welsh guys will know, called Rachi. And this is the real deal in Welsh hymns. It's got hallelujahs and amens and the whole shebang. Everything's included in this. We'll follow that then with a song written to a traditional Irish air, the Londonderry air, and that's the song of Danny Boy. Thank you very much. We don't hold you too much longer. We're going to finish with the two anthems, but before we do that, I'd just like you to acknowledge our musical director, Geraint Waters, our accompanist, John Shearer, and from Montgomery, our soloist, the only man from Rathtangan who can sing in Welsh, our chairman, John Hoey. Thank you, gents. And we will finish now. If you wouldn't mind, would you stand and we'll sing the two anthems, Welsh and Irish anthems, please. Thank you. Thank you. Let's have lunch. Excellent. I'm emotionally drained after all of that. It's brilliant. So, thank you very much. There's lunch upstairs. You guys have all earned several sandwiches. So, thanks for coming along, and we'll speak to you over coffee and a tea. Thank you. Here are